This is Naked Mormonism.
I pledge my life, all that I may have. I will strive to the utmost of my ability to be what you would want me to be.
It's time to find the truth.
And having set our hand to the plow, we will never look back until this work is finished.
Where is the church going?
I have faith that the Constitution will be saved as prophesied by Joseph Smith. But it will not be saved in Washington. It will be saved by enlightened members of this church.
The explicit tag is there for a reason, so if you get offended at what's said, it's not for you. But, most importantly,
may you ponder the truths you've heard. May they help you become even better than you were.
Skepticize everything.
Welcome to episode 62 of the Naked Mormonism Podcast, the serial Mormon history podcast. Today is Thursday, August 10th, 2017. My name is Bryce Blankenagel, and thank you for joining me. On this episode, we jump into early spring of 1840 with Elias Higbee in Washington, D.C. still advocating on behalf of the Mormons. Joe gets back to Nauvoo after having abandoned the Mormons during a very harsh winter just to go speak with the U.S. government in the first place to get some kind of recourse for the saints suffering in Missouri. Rigdon is laid up with sickness and won't respond to letters while in his fragile state. Joe holds a general conference to handle the issues in Nauvoo which had cropped up in his absence, and we are finally introduced to one of the most infamous characters in all of Mormon history as he finally makes his way into our historical timeline. After that, I'll be speaking with Mark Naugle so he can tell us a little of his story and the social impact of people officially leaving the church in droves. Before we get into the episode today, I want to let everybody know that the video of the Sunstone presentation that Cody and I did on the Smith entheogen theory is finally up. Now, we had some technical difficulties, so the video itself isn't great, but the content is fully intact, and the response to the presentation has been overwhelmingly positive, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So be sure to chase the show notes for a link, or you can just search, "Did Joseph Smith drug the Mormons?" in the YouTube search bar, and it should come up. Last episode, we discussed the meeting Joe had with a congressional committee appointed to hear the plea of the Mormons. The saints had suffered so much of what they called persecution during their time in Missouri, and they felt deserving of some kind of redress for their sufferings. Joe and Elias Higbee were the Mormon leaders tasked with this meeting to tell the Mormon side of the story and get Congress to empathize with their plight. It wasn't as successful as they hoped, and Joe left before the hearings were even completed to handle business in Nauvoo that he'd abandoned to meet with the government in the first place. Now it's time to wipe off our milk mustaches and get ready to munch some meat for today.
As the scriptures say, they must have milk before meat.
While Joe had departed D.C. and returned to Nauvoo after the first few days of the congressional hearings, Judge Elias Higbee had, like I said, remained in town to continue to advocate for the Mormons given what had happened in Missouri. And we read last episode the resolution of the committee that basically relinquished any presence that they had in the conflict and left the problem to the state of Missouri to deal with. Joe and the Mormons in Illinois and Iowa were unaware of this resolution and thus continued to gather testimonials from Mormons who'd suffered at the hands of the militia in Missouri to try and bolster the Mormons' case in the application for redress. Judge Elias Higbee stayed behind and continued to fight while Joe went back to Nauvoo to continue handling church affairs. During this whole time, Hingepin Sidney Rigdon stayed in Philadelphia, remaining largely silent in reply to any letters which were sent to him. At multiple times, Higbee wrote letters to Rigdon updating him on the proceedings of the congressional committee, only to never hear back from him in regards to his whereabouts. Finally, Rigdon took the time to pen a letter to Joe in Nauvoo, giving an update on his state of existence. We'll get to reading that letter in just a bit here, but before we do, let's briefly discuss the folder that Joe and the Mormons were still putting together for this congressional committee, unbeknownst to them, in complete and utter futility. As soon as Joe got back into town, he called a major conference to be held to address whatever business he'd missed since his departure for Washington, D.C. Needless to say, there had been some infighting going on in his absence. And we won't get into the drama of it, but essentially Elder Patton, Snow, and Fordham had done something that had pissed off the other brethren, and they were stripped of their leadership ranking, while Joseph Noble, Simeon Porter, and Daniel Avery were appointed to fill the vacancies. After these petty disputes were sufficiently handled, Joe took control of the meeting and preached something that, well, it surprised me when I read this, when I first came across it in research for this episode. This is taken from the Dan Vogel History of the Church, Volume 4, page 76. Quote, President Joseph Smith Jr. addressed the council on various subjects, and in particular, the consecration law, stating that the affair now before Congress was the only thing that ought to interest the saints at present. Until it was ascertained how it would terminate, no person ought to be brought to account before the constituted authorities of the church for any offense whatever, and was determined that no man should be brought before the council in Nauvoo till that time. That the law of consecration could not be kept here, that it was the will of the Lord that we should desist from trying to keep it, and if persisted in, it would produce a perfect defeat of its object, and that he assumed the whole responsibility of not keeping it until proposed by himself, keeping it being the law of consecration, end quote. The law of consecration had been enshrined as a holy commandment in the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Mormons had attempted to practice it while living in Missouri. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about here, the law of consecration sets out a system of communalism by which the saints had to live. Basically, they put all of their possessions in the bishop's storehouse, which would then be disseminated to the saints as the leadership saw fit. Now, systems like this have attempted to work in the past, but usually only enjoy success in very small groups and only for very limited periods of time. The saints, supposedly numbering about 15,000 people by this time, were far too large a group to effectively practice communalism without corruption getting in the way. Thus, the law of consecration was abandoned. The added problem when they were in Missouri was the fact that they were stealing the property of the Gentile non-Mormon Missourians in the land round about. They called it, they were consecrating the Gentiles' property. So, if the government caught word that the Mormons were practicing in Nauvoo the same system that served to be their downfall in Missouri, it might look kind of bad during this congressional committee hearing. Of course, if you're a member of the brethren in this meeting asking about the law of consecration, and Joe just says, hey, we need to focus on the congressional hearings, and a natural question would arise, and that question might be something along the lines of, but Brother Joseph, has not the Lord commanded us to practice the law of consecration? To which Joe replied, it is the will of the Lord that we should desist from trying to keep it. Basically saying, don't worry guys, if God holds us at fault for disobeying this direct commandment of the law of consecration, I'm his prophet, I have some pull with the big guy upstairs, so I'm going to take the heat for it. Regardless of God's position on the subject, this was the most pragmatic option to keep the Mormons from getting into deeper trouble. Not only was the Missouri government in opposition to their cause, but now that they had the eye of the president and Congress, it was a really good idea to keep their noses clean for a bit longer and not try to reinstate the law of consecration. The next item of business during this conference is one line which sets the tone for the next multiple entries, and it simply says, quote, he requested every exertion to be made to forward affidavits to Washington and also letters to members of Congress, end quote. And then the history of the church includes a ton of signed affidavits from Mormons who had suffered in Missouri. And I'll just briefly read the summary paragraph once all of these were compiled, because they basically all say the same things. Before reading this, remember that just the affidavits from Joe and Hiram alone claimed damages of $200,000. So once they had all of these complaints cobbled together, you would think it should fetch a pretty healthy sum. So this is from page 93 of Volume 4 of the Dan Vogel History of the Church. Quote, "Thus I have given a few of the multitude of affidavits which might be given to substantiate the facts of our persecution and death in Missouri. When the brethren left Missouri, they were poor, having been plundered of everything valued by mobs. Much of it was done under the eye of the government officers, according to the foregoing affidavits, and all by the sanction of the state of Missouri, as the acts of her legislature testify, and being so numerous, they were obliged to scatter over the state of Illinois and different states to get bread and clothing, so that but a few accounts against Missouri could be collected without unreasonable exertions. About 491 individuals gave in their claim against Missouri, which I presented to Congress, amounting to about, any guesses? All right, hold your breath. $1,381,044.51.5. Whew. Leaving a multitude more of similar bills hereafter to be presented, which, if not settled immediately, will ere long amount to a handsome sum, increasing by compound interest." End quote. That was the totality of the remuneration that the saints were requesting from the United States government. Now, that $1.381 million in $1840 amounts to, I hope you're sitting down, $36,120,417. And like I said last episode, most of the valuation they used to create that number was highly suspect and couldn't actually be verified by deed records. Many of the Mormons were just glorified squatters, and the government knew that. So it's understandable that they may have been a bit shocked by the number that Joe claimed in damages here. $36 million is a lot of money for any group of people. Now, it's really no wonder that they kicked the whole issue back to Missouri to handle the issue internally, especially because the federal government back then had much less power and influence as opposed to how much it does now. And also worth noting, Joe had provided a revelation that was agreed to by the brethren that he would be in control of the assets that the government paid out to the saints. So if the government did end up paying out that, $1.381 million, Joe would have been one of the richest people in Illinois at the time. Now, this council that was held in Nauvoo concluded with these calls to action to just focus on the congressional hearing, with nobody there knowing that it had been rejected while they were having this meeting. So finally, a letter came from Judge Elias Higbee, who'd remained in Washington on behalf of the Mormons, and it was addressed to Joe and the brethren in commerce. And this was their defeat. Quote, "Dear brother, our business is at last ended here. Yesterday, a resolution passed the Senate that the committee should be discharged and that we might withdraw the accompanying papers, which I have done. I have also taken a copy of the memorial and want to be off for the West immediately. I have not gotten a letter from President Rigdon, although I have frequently written to him. I have received a letter from Brother Bennett stating that he was in the Jerseys and that he was calculating to have me come that way and go home with him, and also that he had business which he wanted me to attend to at the office here." Continuing from further in the letter, quote, "There is one honest Quaker-looking sort of man here by the name of William Green, who has 2 iron printing presses with other things necessary that would come to commerce, provided you could find work for him, and inform him of the same. How much work there is to do I know not. Therefore, merely write that if such a man and establishment are wanted, you could easily obtain them, or would know where they could be obtained." End quote. And that was it. That letter signified the end of this congressional battle. The saints were just supremely screwed over for so many reasons, and the whole case was dismissed from the government. They couldn't go back to Missouri as the extermination order was still in place, and Joe would certainly be arrested as soon as he set foot across a state line. Now, Higbee also got to another important point in that letter, which seems to underlie so many of the letters that were being sent to the presidency of every group of missionaries. Higbee told Joe of a printer that was looking for some work to hopefully fill the vacuum of church printed materials everybody was requesting to be filled. The quorum, on their mission across the states, soon to be in England, were sending similar letters to Joe in hopes that they could print some books of Mormon, some hymn books, and church periodicals, but Joe didn't want to cede control of that power and the copyright, and he doesn't seem to have replied in the affirmative to any of these requests, and they were very extensive. Now, he would eventually give up control and allow the quorum to print just over 4,000 books of Mormon out of Liverpool in 1841, but that was a year and a half after multiple people had been asking for copies or asking for Joe to release the copyright so that they could print copies and forward him the proceeds. It was a huge project, and Joe needed to oversee this project and the revision of the Book of Mormon. And there were 2,000 copies of the Book of Mormon that were published out of Nauvoo. That was near the end of 1840. But they would undergo heavy editing under the careful hand of Joe, Ebenezer Robinson, and Don Carlos Smith. So if you want a breakdown of all the editions of the Book of Mormon, you'll find a link to the Encyclopedia of Mormonism on the BYU website in the show notes. But let's get to the third important point that Higbee mentioned in that letter. And he said that he'd been writing to Rigdon and not getting anything in return. And I mentioned it earlier, but let's finally read some of that letter that Hingepin Rigdon finally sent to Joe after his seeming hiatus from any contact. This is from Sidney Rigdon to Joseph Smith. Quote, "Dear Sir, I thought I would occupy a portion of this morning in writing to you. By a letter received from Brother Higbee yesterday, I have learned that the Senate has decided that they have no constitutional right to interfere in the case between us and the people of Missouri, and refer us to the courts of redress, either those of Missouri or the United States." Now, right here, this is where Rigdon hatches a plan and possibly unites perceptions against a common enemy who the Mormons painted as responsible for all of their troubles in Missouri. He goes on to say, "Now I am confident that there is but one person in Missouri that we can sue with safety, and that is Boggs, Governor Lilburn Boggs, and he is known to be a bankrupt and unable to pay his debts. That if we should sue him, we will have the cost to pay, and he has nothing to pay it with. We are therefore left to bear the loss without redress at present." And I think that's kind of where Boggs starts to become public enemy number one against the Mormons. But the next portion of the letter describes Rigdon's situation, and it may have contributed to his overall pessimistic outlook on the situation, both his own and of the Mormons. Quote, "I am up to this time without any means to get home, but I have no uneasiness about it. I shall doubtless get means as soon as my health will admit of my going. My health is slowly improving, and I think if I have no relapse, I will be able to leave for home sometime in the month of May. I have not had a chill for about 4 weeks. My appetite is quite good, and my food sits well on my stomach and digests well. But there are the remains of spells, of that foulness of stomach which has troubled me so much, and those morbid sensations which were the cause of it. My feet and legs swell every afternoon considerably. There is a great excitement got up here by Almond Babbitt about going to Kirtland. A number from Philadelphia are going immediately. Now it is my opinion that this is an unwise movement. Large purchases have been made there for the saints, and if they should fail to purchase, it will leave us in difficulty. I wish you would say to my family that on yesterday I had a letter from George Robinson, dated at Vermont. He is well. You may also say to them that the prospect of my speedy restoration to health is flattering at present, and that I will be there as soon as I think my health sufficient for the journey. I expect to return to Philadelphia week after next, and will not tarry 1 day longer than I think my health requires. My company is all gone, and I am entirely alone. But it is all right, there is no blame. I should have been very glad to have been at the conference, but as I cannot, I repine not. Believe me, your brother, in the hope of eternal life as ever. Signed, Sidney Rigdon. End quote. Rigdon was in a pretty bad place. You know, I've discussed Rigdon at length, and I really like him. I think he's an important individual in church history. You know, I've occasionally made reference to his mental state of well-being, or lack thereof, and how that may have played a role in his punctuated involvement with Joe and the Mormons. As we get further into the Nauvoo years, Rigdon continually disconnects himself from the affairs of the Mormons. He gives occasional sermons, he attends occasional meetings, but his place as second in command of the church was being steadily threatened more and more with each passing day. The vacancy that Rigdon's absence left was quickly filled by a few select brethren who became Joe's best friends and closest advisors periodically throughout the Nauvoo years. I'm going to read 2 more letters that were sent to Joe as Rigdon was making his way back to Nauvoo. And the implications are incredibly crucial to the upcoming scenes in Nauvoo, as the person who penned these letters would become one of the most critical influencers to Nauvoo city policies during his brief time with the Mormons. These are taken from the Joseph Smith papers. Check the show notes for the links. Quote, Fairfield, Illinois, July 25th, 1840. Reverend and dear friends, I'll just note really quickly, at this time in Nauvoo, Joseph was being referred to more and more as Reverend Smith. So that's why he says, Reverend and dear friends. Quote, the last time I wrote you was during the pendency of your difficulties with the Missourians. You are aware that at the time I held the office of Brigadier General of the Invincible Dragoons of this state and proffered you my entire energies for your deliverance from a ruthless and savage, though cowardly foe. But the Lord came to your rescue and saved you with a powerful arm. I am happy to find that you are now in a civilized land and in the enjoyment of peace and happiness. Some months ago, I resigned my office with an intention of removing to your town and joining your people. But hitherto I have been prevented. I hope, however, to remove to Commerce and unite with your church next spring. I believe I should be much happier with you. I have many things to communicate which I would prefer doing orally, as I propose to meet you in Springfield on the first Monday in December next, as I shall be there at that time on state and United States business. If I remove to Commerce, I expect to follow my profession, and to that end I enclose you a slip from the Louisville Journal to give you an idea of my professional standing. On the 1st of this month, I was appointed to the office of Quartermaster General of the state of Illinois, which office I expect to hold for some years. I hope you have been well. In haste, write me immediately. Yours respectfully. And then it's signed. That's the first letter. The person who wrote this said that he was aware of what was going on between the Mormons and Missourians, and he was really glad, he gave his exertions in trying to deliver them from the, the ruthless and savage, cowardly foe. But he said, luckily God intervened and rescued you with a swift and powerful arm. The second letter is much more important, and it implies a shift for the fate of the saints in Nauvoo, and it was sent less than a month later. Quote, Reverend Joseph Smith Jr. and Sidney Rigdon, respected friends, I have written you several times communications to Commerce and Nauvoo, supposing they were different places, but a brother to a lady in your community now in this place informs me that they are one and the same. I have received no reply to my letters and attribute the delay to a press of business or professional absence. I have come to the conclusion to join your people immediately and take up my abode with you. Let us adopt our motto, Sicut Patribus sit Deus nobis. I guess is Latin for, as God was with our fathers, so may he be with us. And adopt the means to the end, and the victory is ours. The winged warrior of the air will not cease to be our proud emblem of liberty, and the dogs of war will be forever chained. I shall be with you in about 2 weeks, and shall devote my time and energies to the advancement of the cause of truth and virtue, and the advocacy of the holy religion which you have so nobly defended and so honorably sustained. My love to all the brethren, with sentiments of paternal regard. Yours respectfully, signed, John C. Bennett. John Cook Bennett made for a powerful ally to Joe and the Saints. But he also made himself to be one of the church's greatest adversaries. This is a brief excerpt from his biography on the Joseph Smith Papers. Born August 3rd, 1804, died August 5th, 1867. Physician, minister, poultry breeder, born at Fairhaven, Bristol County, Massachusetts, son of John Bennett and Abigail Cook. Moved to Marietta, Washington County, Ohio, 1808, to Massachusetts in 1812, and back to Marietta in 1822. Married first to Mary A. Baker, January 9th, 1826, at Marietta. joined Pickaway Masonic Lodge in 1827 in Circleville, Pickaway County, Ohio. Methodist, later affiliated with Christian Disciple or Campbellite faith. Moved to Wheeling, Ohio County, Virginia, later in West Virginia, 1831. Charged with lying and other misconduct by Pickaway Masonic Lodge in 1834. Moved to Fairfield, Wayne County, Illinois, 1838. Commissioned Brigadier General in 2nd Division in Illinois Militia, 1839. Moved to Nauvoo, Hancock, Illinois, 1840. Baptized into LDS Church, September 1840 at Nauvoo. Helped draft and secure Nauvoo Charter, 1840. End quote. Now that biography, there's a lot more after that, but we can't get ahead of ourselves. John Bennett had exchanged letters with Joe and Rigdon a few times prior to this, having learned Mormon doctrine sometime in the mid-1830s, but he apparently hadn't given it proper consideration up to that point or something, so here we are. August of 1840, he sent this letter to Joe and Rigdon telling him that he intends to join the Mormon religion in Nauvoo and further their cause, and even take up abode with them. Now I'm going to read an excerpt from Robert Flanders' book titled Nauvoo. This is from chapter 4, and I think it provides some wonderful insight on John C. Bennett. Quote, "It seemed not to occur to Smith that some men might wish to cultivate him for their own purposes. Mormonism, like any growing enterprise, attracted the ambitious and the clever. Some were men of integrity and some were not. But Smith was, at the outset of their relationship, a less able judge of character than of talent and charm. Little is known of Bennett either before or after his affair with the Mormons. He was an officer of the Invincible Dragoons, a militia company of Edwards, White, and Wabash counties in southeastern Illinois, and was living at Fairfield in neighboring Wayne County in 1840. Despite the medical title, Bennett presented the image of a military man. Politics and the pursuit of influence were the professions he sought when he approached the Mormons and offered his services." Continuing later on, Bennett in his letter conveyed the air of a busy man of affairs with obligations and responsibilities of moment. Yet he seemed to be one of those noble men of earth who had condescended to believe God's truth with humility and meekness to obey the command of his prophet. Continuing later on, Bennett was serious about moving to Nauvoo and joining the church, and he arrived in August or September of 1840. He was there, however, not as an ordinary convert, but in the seat of power at the prophet's right hand. The Mormon leader felt himself in need of a man such as Bennett seemed to be as an advisor, confidant, and executive lieutenant. Sidney Rigdon was proving a slender reed in the demanding business of kingdom building. Brigham Young and Heber Kimball were in England. Smith was young, without knowledge of the ways of the world in which he was now committed to promote the kingdom, and he was standing virtually alone at the head of his people. Bennett seemed to be a man of ambition, force, energy, and intelligence, qualities that had already won him preferment in the world. They were attributes which Smith possessed himself and admired in others, and he expected this prestigious new aide-de-camp to open doors for the advancement of Nauvoo. Bennett played a conspicuous role in developing two of the most characteristic and important Nauvoo institutions, the city government and the Nauvoo Legion. He took up residence in Nauvoo in time to avail the benefits of his speaking powers to the semi-annual conference in October of 1840, which took official action concerning these institutions. On October 5th, the agenda of business included a motion to appoint a committee responsible for drafting, quote, "a bill for the incorporation of the town of Nauvoo and for other purposes," end quote. Smith, Bennett, and Robert B. Thompson were designated as the committee, presumably by Smith as presiding officer. Smith and Bennett had already been at work on the charter and probably had it completed before the conference met. On the same afternoon that committee was authorized, Bennett reported to the assemblies the outlines of the Nauvoo City Charter. The conference endorsed the committee's work, apparently with little or no debate. Bennett was now an officially recognized and endorsed architect of the city's future. End quote. I might make some enemies with this, but I love John Bennett. Okay, and let me qualify what I'm saying here. I don't love what he did because, let's face it, he was a grade A premium All-American bastard, but what he symbolizes is so powerful powerful and exciting, as Nauvoo was beginning to become the sprawling metropolis it was in the early 1840s. Bennett was just a more brazen, full-tilt version of Joseph Smith. Everything Bennett did to become maligned in church history, Joseph was doing under the surface. Joe was just a bit more discreet about his actions. Now, let me give examples. While Joe practiced the God-approved polygamy with some women in Nauvoo, Bennett was openly propositioning women to become his spiritual wives on a much wider scale, and was likely providing abortions when pregnancy inevitably happened. And while Joe tried to lobby Congress and rub elbows with influential people in Illinois and state government, Bennett had years of practice in government and leadership roles and used that experience to bend people to his will. What Joe delivered by divine revelation as guidance for the saints, Bennett enshrined the will of God into law. When Joe thought it might be a good idea to curb public drunkenness plaguing Nauvoo, Bennett passed city ordinances to outlaw the sale of alcohol in small quantities. Joe likely did a number of things out of nothing more than self-interest, whereas self-interest was John Bennett's sole guiding principle. That was John Bennett's thing. He personified all of Joe's most and least likable traits and turned them up a couple of levels until the people just couldn't take him anymore. He was an eccentric human version of every polarizing trait the prophet held. You know, if Joe was like a real protagonist to a based on a true story type of fictionalized Mormon history, Bennett would be Joseph's evil twin. The anti-Joe, if you will. His style was brashness. His forte, intensity. He did everything that Joe did, but to such extremes that he broke everything. When John Bennett got a hold of something, he didn't bend it, he broke it. Thus inducting John Bennett into the echelons of influential Mormon historical figures deserving of his very own name-o nickname. John Bennett will be known to us as John Brokeit for the purposes of our historical timeline. Keep your eye on this one. He may not be with us long, but his power and presence influenced Mormon history, and his defection from the church nearly broke it in half, leaving Nauvoo in social ruins amidst rumors of underground sex and abortion rings, and using undue political influence leading up to Joe's run for President of the United States. I really look forward to learning all about John Brokeit as we move further into the Nauvoo years of Joe's Mormonism. Let's see just how far John Brokeit can bend Joe and the Mormons before he breaks everything and begins his crusade against the people he once called his acolytes. Speaking of people trying to bend a system until it breaks, the next segment you're going to hear is an interview that I had with Mark Naugle of quitmormon.org. The audio isn't great because it was conducted in my car right by the airport, but the conversation is really great, and I have a feeling like Mark Naugle's work is only the harbinger of a broader trend of people, especially millennials, who are giving the church the middle finger by sending in their resignation letters. Without further ado, this is my conversation with Mark Naugle. Today we are joined by Mark Naugle, attorney at law, as well as well-noted attorney affiliated with quitmormon.org. Mark, thank you for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, you came up to me, oddly enough. We're recording live from Seattle. You're on a bit of a vacation at the moment. So I guess the thanks are in order for me. Thank you for taking some time out of today to talk to me.
No problem. It worked out perfectly.
Awesome. So tell me, I want to talk about Quit Mormon and the project that you're affiliated with and the history behind that, how you became affiliated with this. But first, before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about you, who you are, and your walk through Mormonism. Do you mind walking us through? Were you born into the covenant, as it's often said by some people?
I was born into the covenant. I'm an original member.
OM
of the covenant. My parents are from Kansas. They moved to Utah before I was born, and I was a member of the church since birth. Went through all the steps. Got baptized at age 8. Confirmed as a deacon age 12. Did all the things that I was supposed to be doing along with my family, and at age 14, my dad sat me down and told me that maybe what we were doing wasn't the best idea or wasn't true.
Really? Your
That's right.
dad sat you down?
That's right.
Because oftentimes when it goes from, the millennial generation leaves the church and then they have to have that talk with their parents. It was the other way around with you.
Yeah, it was the other way around. My dad sat me down one summer day and told me, you know what, Mark, I've been on the internet, I've been doing a lot of research, and this isn't true. None of this is true. And it was a huge relief to me, honestly.
Wow, no kidding. Well, you were a teacher. You were just... you're just coming under the scrutiny of the bishop and whatnot.
That's right, exactly. Yep.
Don't you touch that thing now.
My body was changing, and the rules were very hard to follow.
Wow, no kidding. So 14, I mean, essentially after that, you're done, right?
Well, so my mom put the restriction. She didn't want to leave the church. She loved the community. She loved being, she was the primary president. For some years, she liked going to church and doing all the activities and having a community to be a part of.
The community. That's the biggest part.
Right. So she said, if we're not going to go to a Mormon church, I'm okay with that, but we have to go to some church. So we knew a family that was actually from my football team, that they went to an evangelical church there in Orem. Okay. And so we started going there we went there for a couple of years. Okay.
And then what? You're just like, no more.
After I realized, it was me and my brother realized that they were no different than the Mormons. They wanted to tell us what to do with our lives and our bodies and everything else, that we decided we didn't want to go anymore. So about 17 was maybe the last time I've been to church as a believer.
Okay, so that was early 2000s, 04, 05-ish, something like that, right?
Let's see, that would have been in 2002 that I stopped going to church.
02. Okay, fascinating. So what has it been since then? You haven't been affiliated with the church, but you're kind of in the ex-Mormon spotlight because of what you do. How did you come to do what you do now?
So when I graduated from law school, I realized that this might be something I could try. When we left the church, the bishopric started showing up, demanding meetings, coming to our house unannounced. Relief Society started stopping by. We were drifting into outer darkness. They had to try and lasso us back in.
Exactly.
And I completely understand. From their perspective, they think they're doing the right thing. They think they're saving you from eternal damnation. So
and you can't fault them for that.
Yeah, it's hard.
Just part of what they're told to do.
Right. But I thought there has to be an easier way. And I saw the pain that it caused my family to see these people. Because, what they'll do is put a hook in one of you. Like maybe my mom, and say, well, are you sure you want your family this to happen? And then all of a sudden mom's having all these doubts when everyone else is ready to go. And then maybe a friend comes over and talks to me, or, and so they make it hard to leave, intentionally or not, or with malintent or not. It's not easy. So when I graduated law school, I started doing this to help people who just wanted a clean break.
So what is this then?
So essentially what I do is I stand between the member who wants to leave and the church and say I am their legal representation, and I submit a letter on their behalf and an authorization as an agent form, making me their agent, saying I can resign on their behalf from the church.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's what I do.
So you told me this a little bit before, but I mean, before the November of 2015 leaks about the church's handbook policy on how to treat gay families and whatnot, you'd done just a small handful of these things, right?
Yeah, I'd done maybe 30 or 40, mostly for close friends and relatives. I'd put it up on Reddit as something that I would be willing to do on the ex-Mormon subreddit, and I'd done a bunch through, maybe 20 through there. But it wasn't until the Mormon policy leaked that it became a big deal.
Yeah, and I think you said you received something like 2,000 submissions of people that wanted their records removed from the church in a weekend.
Yep, that's right. I got at least 2,000 emails. It took a while to get to about 5,000 resignations total. That took, I think, about 6 months.
6 months to get to 5,000 total.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That is a lot of names that otherwise they would have had to go through all of the process of it themselves. They wouldn't have had legal representation because, a massive corporation like the church, when they see a letterhead from attorney or law offices of, they're going to pay more attention than just, hey, this is me, can you please remove my records, right?
That seems to be how they operate. Yeah, if you try to do it on your own, I don't know if they have a complex algorithm or if they throw darts at a board, but half the time you'll get a letter saying, please reconsider. By the way, your bishop's going to be contacting you.
Interesting.
And I also hear from people that, it's a quick, they'll get a letter back that says, sure, you've been removed. So I don't know how they do it or how they decide, but I think it's about a 50-50 prospect.
So I wonder if that's just left up to like the stake presidents or the bishops of that specific demographic. They're like, yeah, if they're a prominent member of the community or whatever, go badger them for a little while. Whereas for the majority, it's like, yeah, whatever, cut them off and that's done.
Yeah,
I guess there's no way to know, really, is there?
Absolutely no way to know, but it's got to be something. I mean, they take pretty detailed records, and upload it into a computer system of how often you attend and how much you've attended over the last 3 years,
how much tithing you've given.
Yeah, exactly right. So I'm sure those are factors. I think they're factors, but there's no way to know.
Fair enough. So so when this November of 2015 leak came out, I know you had like a booth set up for, I don't think it was actually Quit Mormon, but you had a booth set up at the mass resignation that happened on Temple Square. Is that right?
So it just kind of, it snowballed really, really fast. So I think the leak came out on a Thursday. I offered on the ex-Mormon subreddit to do this for free that night. And then the requests just started flowing in. And ironically, I was actually traveling that Friday, bringing my mom back to Utah.
Okay.
I was moving her back to Utah. I had been taking care of her in Colorado while she was sick. But that Friday we moved, and then Saturday I had been emailing back and forth with the organizers of the mass resignation. It was already scheduled.
Oh, wow.
And they offered to just do the whole thing and set it up for me.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, from then on, you've just been plugging away at a ton of resignations.
Yep. I think right now we're getting about 25 a day. Luckily, the system is largely automated for me. Thank you very much to, I don't know if he wants me to say his last name, but Ryan. He's user XIAC. No idea how to say that on Reddit. So send him your thanks. But he's put in an amazing amount of work on quitmormon.com, quitmormon.org, to make that website viable for everyone to use, really easy to use, and for me to do the stuff through the church.
That's really awesome that the infrastructure is built there, and all you have to do is basically just punch in your name, and then it's done.
That's right. Yeah, punch in your name, and you can sign it either with right on your tablet or phone, or with Adobe. So it's pretty cool.
Wow. Okay, so since 2015 and this whole thing began to snowball, how many resignations do you estimate that you've done?
We're somewhere between 20 and 25,000 right now.
1,000.
Yeah, if you go to the site and click on our stats section, you can see how many the website itself has done. I had done about 15,000 prior to getting the site up and going.
Okay.
So now we keep very detailed records there, so you can keep track, and we also tweet every time we send out a resignation.
That's so cool. Okay, so I want to ask this, and this is only just my own wanting to know from my atheist and skeptical perspective. Do you keep demographic information on what people transition to, if they transition to a new religion, or if they're just the majority of them are just going to the none category, no religion whatsoever?
We do not keep that stat right now, but that's something that we'll talk about in our next meeting for sure. That's something that it would be very easy to add and might be nice to have on our public stats.
I'd be very interested to see that myself, because that's largely something that is impacting the millennial generation as they're coming up in the church. A lot of millennials are leaving. The church has terrible retention rate for millennials, and for the number of people that resign, I would be really curious to see how many of them are going to a different congregation versus how many are like me, and it's just like, wow, it's all bullshit. I'm out. I'm done. Screw this. I don't want anything to do with any church whatsoever.
I will say, the one stat we keep is active versus inactive, and by far the majority, I think it's 80% of the people who go through Quit Mormon are inactive.
Okay.
So that is something that we keep, but I'm definitely going to talk to my developer about adding the next category.
Very cool. So let me ask you then, where where do you want this project to go? Is this kind of what you plan on this project being? Or are you planning on implementing anything new? Or is this is kind of the entire point behind Quit Mormon? Is it's just a very simplistic service? You put in your name's off the records, and that's pretty much it. Do you have any other goals that you want to take this?
There are ideas that I have. Of course, I'd love to create a network, especially in Utah, of attorneys and services provided by people who have left the church, especially attorneys. So if you go in as someone who's getting a divorce, going through a marriage in Utah, that is a huge factor. The religion is going to play a huge role. The judges are the vast majority are Mormons, so they're going to favor it. They're going to favor that. So that's something that you would want to be aware of, and you would want something who understood your side, your perspective as maybe a post-Mormon person or someone who's exiting Mormonism, because a lot of this happens, a lot of this happens in and around marriages. Leaving the church also is, a death sentence for many marriages in Utah. If the one partner wants to leave the church and the other doesn't, one spouse. So the idea is maybe to eventually incorporate that into quitmormon.com as maybe just a free referral service of these attorneys who are available to help you. But then it just hasn't happened yet. I think it's something that's going to take time.
That's definitely a large feature to try and implement. It's not just a weekend of coding to punch it in. Yeah, so
absolutely.
I definitely get that. And you'd have to have the affiliate attorneys that sign up to be on the list and stuff. So but I think that's a really exciting prospect, and that could be something helpful for a lot of ex-Mormons that leave.
Hopefully that's the goal. I mean, the reason I do it is just to help people. I know now it doesn't take me very much time to process a resignation. But I know that once someone gets that piece of paper, it's a really big deal for them, and that's why I do it.
Yeah, and I mean, all the time when I'm just perusing through the ex-Mormon Reddit, I just see, captions, got mine today, or like, finally got it, or whatever, and it's just a picture that they post of the letter with their name blacked out that just says, in accordance to your request, their membership records have been deleted from the membership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that's it. But obviously, it's a monumental thing for a lot of people to have their name removed.
Yeah.
That's got to feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's why I still we do have a program where it could just automatically match the names, but I insist on uploading each one myself now, because it is nice to just read the name and know that hopefully this is someone that I helped.
Awesome. Yeah, a bit cathartic, to say the least.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I want to ask you, the letters... The resignation letters, that's essentially the person's cut off from the church, and hopefully they never hear hide nor hair from the church ever again. Does it ever go beyond that? Do you ever have to do anything beyond just sending the resignation letter to chase them off or get people off their back? Or
yeah, I have to contact bishops every once in a while who are a little overzealous. They get the letter. Normally, what happens is the church will remove the name, send me the confirmation back, and then they'll forward that down to the local level.
Okay.
That's at least my understanding. And so what will happen is the name will be removed, on the broader level, but there's still local records that need to either be destroyed or put in the ex-Mormon category or whatever it is they truly do with it.
On the record.
Exactly right. And those, we'll get some overzealous contact from someone who really, really thinks they can, save their soul. So there are times that I have to step in, send an email or just make a quick phone call, but most of the time it's very quickly resolved after that.
Oh, wow. That's good to hear. And obviously, as I said earlier, when you get a letter from somebody that's, a law offices of attorney, whatever, they're going to pay a little more attention. Especially when they're a large corporation that's very interested in their public persona, public face.
That's exactly right. And maybe I shouldn't say this, but within the system, there's a certain level of accountability, of course, right?
Yeah.
So the bishop reports to a stake president, the stake president reports to whatever the next level is, zone leader or whatever they call them,
regional or whatever.
Right. So the corporate structure actually works in our favor a lot of times, because if I'm contacting a bishop saying, "Hey, what's the problem here? Do I need to talk to the stake president?" He's usually very quick to resolve the issue before
we go to your boss.
Right, exactly right.
Okay. I want to ask you something. This is just the conspiratorial brain inside of my mind that wants to ask this question. In your opinion, I don't know if you have any actual information to base this on or not, do you think that these records, when you do get the letter back, it says the records have been removed, do you think that those are actually click Shift Delete, completely erased from the servers? Or do you think that they just go to like a separate file of like these people have requested, but the name and record information and all of it still exists on the records?
There's no way to know. Personally, I don't believe that the names are completely removed at this point.
Okay.
That may be something that Quit Mormon has to do in the future. If it becomes a big enough problem where people are still receiving contact somehow, or we find out that there is just a whole nother set of lists and they're using them for other purposes, it may be something that we have to take on in the future. And so building that network of attorneys, even for that purpose, is something that I'm interested in doing as well.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, now I want to ask you, this seems really relevant to the conversation as well. What has been the overall reaction from all ends of the belief spectrum to Quit Mormon and to what you're doing?
Overwhelmingly positive, to be honest with you. I'll have people who want to resign and decide, oh no, I'm going to be removed from grandma's will, or mom and dad really are going to disown me, or right. This is going to ruin my marriage, and they decide to give it more time and want to cancel their request. Even the people, in those positions, they realize they came to quitmormon.com for a reason in the first place. Yeah. So they realize the value of the service, and many of them are, I'm really sorry or kind of embarrassed that they have to retract their request.
Wow.
But at the same time, they acknowledge, the service that's being provided. So I do get hate mail from time to time. I think the worst is like family reunions. Because
your own family,
they won't. Yeah, my family reunion, they just won't even look at me, or you're
the black sheep.
Hey, Mark, side eyes. I get a lot of side eyes.
In that same vein, have you had? Because obviously you're not exactly evangelical about this. You don't just go out there and you don't hold a sign up at Temple Square and say, "Hey, go to quitmormon.org." I mean, you just say this service is there for the people that want it.
Yeah.
Have you met people that are like firebrand? They want to get this out there. They want to deconvert as many Mormons as possible, and they want to use your service to do this?
That's pretty rare. And I think if you know the non-religious community, most of us are maybe a little bit angry about what we've been through. Yeah. But at the same time, we realize that this is a process that each person has to go through on their own.
Oh, yeah.
So there's no real way. I mean, I could go around and say, hey, everyone, read the CES letter. But, visiting quitmormon.com is not going to help you leave Mormonism or, mentally find your way out. We're just there once you've reached that step. So that's not common, but I do get people from, new religious communities that, see an opportunity to pick up more people to their congregation. Like, oh, well, by the way, this is still true. All of these parts of the Bible are still true.
Well, people are leaving Mormonism. Where are they going to go for their community?
Yeah, exactly.
Where are they going to go for their Jesus?
Exactly right. And those people, I generally, let them know that I'm not interested in helping them with that task. And we usually part ways very quickly.
Wow. Okay. I guess as more of an evolution beyond this, in terms of just quitmormon.org, do you think that the church is actually responding, or they're actually coming to grips that this is a trend that's happening? Or do you think that they're just trying to play ignorant to the fact that now tens of thousands of people are actively resigning from their church?
What I think has happened is I've been asked this in other interviews that I've done. Like, do you think, because the story is Dallin H. Oaks was the man who confirmed me when I was baptized.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because his grandson got baptized at the same time as me.
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah, so I've been asked, do you think Dallin H. Oaks knows your name? And I don't think so. Honestly, I don't. Okay. I think this is something that's been going on for a long time, without attorney representation, of course.
Right.
People are inactive in the church, at the very least. And more are, actually leave, or many actually leave. So I think I told you earlier, I spoke to Curtin McConkie lawyers. I do on occasion, and they're astonished when I say, I'm missing 900 resignations. Where are they? They thought it was going to be 4 or 5 or,
Right.
So I don't know how many people even within the church know about what we do, but they are certainly aware that a very large percentage of millennials and young people are leaving the church in large droves.
Let me ask your speculation. What do you think that means for the future of the church? Because obviously it's already a gerontocracy that's run by people who were raised in the Cold War era or, were born during the Great Depression.
Right.
With the majority of their membership, or a bunch of their membership of the younger generation leaving, what do you think that means for the church in a very broad sense?
It's a little bit scary, because what happens when you back an animal, or in this case a corporation, into a corner? They're going to try to seize more control or deeper control over the people that they have control over. So that's a little bit terrifying, and I'm not a religious historian at all. They'll either have to modernize, they'll have to change, or just decide maybe we'll just be a business and start paying taxes. I really don't know. I have no idea what they're going to do. It's hard to know.
Wow. Yeah, and that is kind of a broad question. I don't think anybody knows exactly how the next few years are going to play out. But I think the next few years are some of the most important years for the church, as they're coming under heavier, more harsh public scrutiny for their stance on LGBTQ issues.
Right.
Obviously that's how Quit Mormon really got its legs in the first place, was in response to their November 2015 leak. And the longer that they keep their current perspective, the further they're pushed into obscurity and antiquity. And it's not going to survive long that way. They're going to have to adapt and change soon, in my opinion.
Yeah, or they'll be extremists in the near future.
Yeah, who knows? Wow. So, Mark, we don't have much more time left. I want to ask you, are there any kind of parting thoughts that you might want to leave with people? Maybe some people listening to this are on the fence about leaving, or just want to know more about what you're doing. Do you have any parting thoughts for those people?
Well, like I always say, people don't realize how hard it is to leave the church until the day they decide to leave the church. Mm-hmm. Even active Mormons, if you try to kind of talk to them about it, they don't get it. They don't understand. They think they're doing the right thing, but as soon as it's time to leave, that's when you know. That's when you know the fight, the uphill fight that you're in for. So, all I'll say is that it's really great on the other side. And that's why I'm here, is to help you make that transition as quickly as possible. If you decide to make that decision. Okay. Again, it doesn't matter to me if you're Mormon or not. I like I said, I love my family as much as I always did, maybe even a little more, because I can say, I know what it's like to be on that side and to know that you're not perfect, even though you're expected to be.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm here. The day that you decide to do it, I'm here to turn it around for you. And here on the other side, it's pretty great. We're here on a Sunday. We just had a beer. It's fantastic. I don't know how else to put it.
And especially for those people living in Utah on Sundays. No lines, no traffic. It's the greatest. No public transit whatsoever, but everything else is really great about Sundays in Utah. So
absolutely right.
Awesome.
All the Boy Scouts leave all the good camping grounds too.
That's true. Even better. Awesome. Well, Mark, thanks for coming to meet me. Thanks for having lunch with me and for sitting down and talking about this. This has been really interesting to get to meet you in person and get kind of the inside scoop of Quit Mormon, because I think this is a valuable service. And just on a personal level, thank you so much for what you're doing. And I'm sure there are some people listening. In fact, I know it for a fact. There are some people listening right now who have used your service, and I'm sure that they thank you as well for it. So, Mark, thank you for doing what you do and for who you are.
Sure, it's my pleasure, and thanks for having this podcast. I'm going to download it and start listening.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, right on.
I just have a parting thought on that. I think quitmormon.org and Mark Naugle fill an incredibly necessary and altruistic niche. This is something the Mormon community needs, as so many people are relieved when they finally get that confirmation letter back telling them that their names are off the church's official records. Now, I would recommend occasionally popping over to the ex-Mormon subreddit just to see posts that, Mark and I talked about, where people are ecstatic to get these letters back, as it's, the official letter saying that the monkey is off their back. And I'm really glad that Naugle does what he does and that the quitmormon.org service exists. And I think the way he approaches the subject is perfect. The service is there to help you if you decide you want to leave the church and have your name removed, but he doesn't advertise or evangelize the service saying that people should leave the church. It's a decision for you to make personally, and the service is there if you do make the decision. Now, I've made my case in the past for why I won't have my name removed, but that's my personal decision. And if I ever change my mind, Mark is going to be my emissary to the church in having my name removed. And it's great to have that freedom of choice in the face of the church when it claims to have all the power to define who is and is not Mormon. So you'll find a link in the show notes for quitmormon.org, as well as some contact information for Mark should you have any questions. And once again, I want to thank Mark for taking some time out of his vacation to meet with me and have that interview. It was really a pleasure. And that's going to do it for today. I do have a couple of new patrons to thank. Looks like we have Clifton and D. Just D. And, that's one of the weirder Patreon names I've ever seen. It's not even capitalized, just D, the little D. Yeah, that's what we're going with. Little D and Clifton. Thank you both so much for pledging to support. That's really awesome of you. And also, I do want to thank the Hall of Fame and Book of Exaltation patrons. We have Doonan, Doubting Dogma Podcast, George, Doug, James, David, Brandon, Howard, David again, Corrine, Jared, Lizzie in the Lab, Stuart, Philip, whom I met at the live show, Scott, Larry, Mark, Derek, Cam, Lane, Dan, Eric, Thomas, Shane, Andrew, Greg, Shelley. Thank you to Karen, Matthew, Mindy, Clint, Clara, Frank, Jay, Judy, Tyler, Chris and Christy, Lynn, and, of course, my good friend Preston. Thanks to all of those who do support the show and really keep the lights running here. This is our commercial. This is how we do commercials for now. So thank you to everybody. So that will pretty much do it for today's episode. Of course, I do want to let all of the people out there listening know this episode isn't special edition or anything on Patreon. There isn't any additional content that you won't hear in the regular feed. But there is an episode that you'll see in the Patreon feed, which is the most recent NAMO Home Evening that we had with Marissa Alexa McCool. It was an LGBT trans activist who really contributes a lot of her voice and time to forwarding the that satanic LGBT agenda. And she really came on and educated us quite a bit on some prescient trans issues, and I do really want to thank Riss for doing so. So if you're a supporter, be sure to check your Patreon-only feed, and you'll gain access to listening to that NAMO Home Evening. Also, just one more time, want to plug the Sunstone presentation video. It is up. It is live on YouTube. Just search for Did Joseph Smith Drug People or Drug the Mormons? Joseph Smith and Drugs, or the Sunstone presentation 2017, or something to the effect of the Joseph Smith entheogen theory. It ought to come up with any of those. So I really look forward to hearing some of your take on it. It was overwhelmingly positive in reception, and I want to hear what you guys think about it. And of course, if you do keep an eye on your podcast feed, you will see that I aired the audio for that presentation just solo. And you'll hear at the beginning, if you listen to it, plug the video, because you really do get a better sense for what we're presenting if you watch the video and see the slides along with us. So that being said, be sure to check that out if it's something that interests you. And I think we're done for today, so let's roll the credits. Thank you so much to Julie as well as Demonista for posting up on the Facebook as well as Twitter pages. They keep the conversation going there, and I deeply thank them for it. Need to thank Craig Keeling. He provided the artwork that's used in this show with his permission. His blog is weirdmormonshit.com, full of really weird Mormon shit. Thank you to Jason Camo. He provided the music that's used in this show with his permission. It's going into your ears right now. Go to aloststateofmind.com to hear the rest of his catalog there. Thank you very much to Andrew Torres of the law offices of P. Andrew Torres, as well as the co-host of the Opening Arguments podcast, for providing the legal services for this show to keep us out of trouble. Thank you so much once again to all the patrons that support the show monetarily and keep this a full-time research endeavor, and really allow me to put all of the time and effort necessary into compiling these things, putting them together, as well as creating presentations and research booklets for presentations like Sunstone. And most importantly, this show would be nothing but me yelling at an empty computer screen if not for all of the correspondence and listenership from all of you amazing listeners. So, thank you so much once again for lending me your ear. Hope to talk to you next time here on the Naked Mormonism Podcast.
Hot off the presses of the Alton Weekly Telegraph, Alton, Illinois, July 16, 1842, the Mormon exposure. A greater part of the inside of our paper of this day is filled with the exposure of the frauds and iniquities of Joe Smith, the Mormon prophet, by Dr. Bennett, late a member of their church. Of the truth of the developments made, we entertain not a doubt, and our only wonder is why someone ere this, whose eyes have been opened to the delusion imposture of Joe Smith, has not come out and made public what is now spread before the people through the instrumentality of Dr. Bennett. We hold, then, that with our political opponents, the statements of Bennett, who is yet a warm Democrat, are entitled to the fullest confidence, and if so, what must be the feelings of every honest man in the state upon reading his disclosures? Are they prepared to sustain Judge Ford, who consents to be run as the candidate of the Mormons when the spiritual head of the sect stands branded by Bennett before the world as an assassin, an adulterer, an impostor, and a swindler? We entreat the citizens of Illinois to read with care and calmness this awful and alarming disclosure, and then decide whether there is not a question to be settled at the approaching election of far greater magnitude than any that possibly can be connected with either of the political parties or their successors. Recollect that the Mormons have taken a stand against Governor Duncan because he was the first man in the state who had the moral courage and fortitude to come out against Mormonism and expose them. Recollect that Judge Ford was not brought out until the Mormons were consulted through Esquire Warren, and their support pledged to him. Recollect that Judge Ford refuses to pledge himself to recommend a repeal of their anti-republican and dangerous charters. Recollect that Judge Ford publicly defends Joe Smith with a full knowledge of all his rascality and glories in being run as their candidate. If Judge Ford is elected, will he not owe his election entirely to Joe Smith? Will he dare to do anything contrary to Joe Smith's wishes, or withhold any office or power that Joe may ask for himself or his followers? Certainly not.
The preceding podcast is a production of Ground Gnomes LLC, copyright 2017, all rights reserved.